There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with seeing too much. It's the loneliness of standing in a crowded room, watching the subtle dance of deception, feeling the weight of unspoken truths, and realizing that you're the only one who notices the emperor has no clothes. Carl Jung called this the most dangerous gift a human being could possess. Not the ability to heal, not the power to create, but the capacity to see what others cannot or will not see, to perceive the shadows that dance behind every smile, the pain that hides beneath every laugh, the fear that motivates every bold declaration. If you've ever felt like you're living in a different reality from everyone around you, if you've ever wondered why you can read people like open books while they remain mysteries to themselves, if you've ever been called too sensitive, too intense, or too much, then Jung had a name for what you carry within you. He called it differentiated perception, and he believed it would either destroy you or transform you into something extraordinary. Jung discovered this through a patient who came to him in 1913. During his own darkest psychological crisis, she was what he would later categorize as an introverted intuitive type, possessing what seemed like supernatural abilities to read the psychological atmosphere of any room she entered. She could sense who was lying before they spoke. She could feel the emotional pain others carried like physical weight in her chest. She could detect the hidden resentments, the secret fears, the unconscious motivations that drove people's behavior, all while they themselves remained completely unaware. But this gift came with a price that Jung found deeply disturbing. She couldn't engage in small talk because she saw through every social facade. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her, as if she could see into their souls without permission. Jung realized he wasn't treating mental illness. He was witnessing what happens when consciousness evolves beyond what society can handle, when perception becomes so refined that it threatens the collective agreements that hold our social world together. This woman wasn't broken, she was advanced. And that advancement made her dangerous, not because she intended harm, but because her very existence challenged the comfortable illusions that most people need to function. Jung wrote in his private notes that she could speak of others as if she had access to their private thoughts and hidden motivations. When he carefully verified her observations, they proved remarkably accurate. This wasn't delusion or psychosis. This was consciousness so developed it had become socially threatening. But the real danger Jung discovered wasn't the perception itself. It was what happened to the people who possessed it. They became what he called psychological mirrors, reflecting back to others the very aspects of themselves they worked hardest to deny. And when someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has only two choices: integrate what's being shown or attack the mirror. Most people choose to attack the mirror. This is why highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they enter. Not because they create problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist. They become the repository for everything the collective cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. Jung observed that these individuals don't just feel misunderstood, they feel systematically targeted by forces they can't rationally explain. They carry the burden of seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable blindness. Through his research, Jung identified 4 distinct types of differentiated perceivers, each processing unconscious content in different ways. The feeling intuitive absorbs others' emotions so completely they often can't distinguish between their own feelings and what they've unconsciously absorbed from their environment. The thinking intuitive sees psychological patterns and predicts behavioral outcomes with startling accuracy, often forecasting relationship failures and personal breakdowns months before they occur, not through logic, but through unconscious pattern recognition. The sensation intuitive can sense the physical manifestations of psychological states in others, detecting illness before symptoms appear, feeling the bodily tension that indicates emotional distress, serving as early warning systems for both psychological and physical disease. And the pure intuitive, the rarest type Jung encountered, sees everything but struggles to organize or express their perceptions coherently. They live in a state of perpetual overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious information without adequate psychological structure to process it constructively. Understanding which type you are becomes crucial because each requires different approaches to what Jung called the integration challenge. But first, you must understand why Jung considered this discovery so dangerous. The first danger is collective unconscious disruption. When someone sees through the shared illusions that hold groups together, the unspoken agreements to ignore certain truths, they become a destabilizing force. Organizations, families, and societies function partly through collective unconscious agreements about what will and won't be acknowledged. The second danger is psychological isolation. Jung documented how differentiated perception creates what he called the problem of the superior function, when your greatest psychological strength becomes the source of your greatest suffering. The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. The third and most dangerous threat is identity dissolution. People who absorb unconscious contents from others often lose contact with their own authentic personality. They become so flooded with external psychological material that they can't distinguish between their own inner world and what they're absorbing from their environment. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious contents. The danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity. This is why Jung developed the individuation process, a systematic approach to maintaining individual identity while developing conscious relationship with unconscious contents. The goal isn't to see less, but to see more wisely. Not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what you perceive. The first phase involves recognition and differentiation. Learning to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. Jung taught his patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. The second phase requires shadow integration. Jung discovered that people who see other shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. The final phase involves conscious participation in the collective unconscious. The ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. This requires developing psychological containers. The ability to hold others' unconscious contents temporarily while maintaining awareness that they are not your own. Jung studied historical figures to understand the difference between successful integration and psychological breakdown. Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. His isolation and eventual breakdown represented what happens when superior perception remains unintegrated. In contrast, Meister Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly, but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. His success came from conscious humility, recognizing that superior perception is a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. Jung himself documented his own struggle with overwhelming perception during his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1919. His superior perception nearly destroyed him until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously, realizing they weren't pathological but evolutionary. Because individuals with superior perception often face isolation, Jung emphasized finding what he called the few who understand. Others capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness. He identified fellow individuated persons who recognize authenticity immediately. those engaged in their own individuation process, and natural containers who can hold psychological content without being overwhelmed. Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships. They ask genuine questions about your observations rather than defending against them. They acknowledge their own contradictions without shame. They demonstrate psychological mindedness and genuine curiosity about consciousness and growth. The recognition process requires careful, gradual revelation, beginning with small observations, noticing response patterns, assessing whether they become defensive or curious, and gradually increasing depth based on demonstrated capacity. Always frame insights as offerings rather than pronouncements. Jung viewed successful individuation as essential, not just for personal well-being, but for the evolution of human consciousness itself. Individuals who successfully integrate superior perception become culture carriers, people who help consciousness evolve through 4 stages of transformation. Recognition without overwhelm occurs when you learn to acknowledge your perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. Integration without isolation involves using perception constructively, while maintaining meaningful relationships. Service without sacrifice happens when perception becomes a gift you offer rather than a burden you carry. Legacy without attachment involves using perception to contribute to collective consciousness evolution without attachment to whether others recognize your contributions. The individuated person works for the future, not for personal recognition in the present. Jung believed highly perceptive individuals serve a vital evolutionary function. Seeing what collective consciousness isn't ready to acknowledge, helping prepare humanity for necessary developmental steps. What appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. But Jung warned about specific pitfalls that can derail transformation. The inflation trap occurs when individuals become identified with their superior function rather than integrating it consciously, falling into the prophet complex of believing they must save everyone from unconsciousness. The withdrawal justification happens when individuals use superior perception to justify complete retreat from society, convincing themselves others are too unconscious to be worth engaging. The helper's trap involves becoming addicted to being needed, defining yourself entirely through your ability to see and help others. Even successfully integrated individuals can experience overwhelm return during stress, trauma, or major transitions, stopping maintenance of psychological boundaries and becoming flooded with others' unconscious contents again. Integration requires constant conscious attention. Jung developed ongoing practices for maintaining healthy integration, regular solitude for distinguishing your own contents from absorbed material, conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities, ongoing shadow work, connection with support of others, and creative expression as an outlet. Jung understood superior perception within the context of collective psychological development. Throughout history, individuals with superior perception appeared before collective consciousness was ready to integrate their insights. Serving as advanced scouts for psychological territories humanity would eventually explore. In the modern era, highly perceptive individuals might be sensing psychological patterns that explain collective behavior, environmental and social unsustainability, spiritual possibilities beyond current frameworks, technological implications, and collective shadow contents needing integration. Jung's crucial insight was that superior perception serves evolution best when integrated consciously rather than suffered unconsciously. The goal isn't to be a martyr to consciousness, but a bridge between what is and what's becoming. The individuated person serves the collective by developing individuality so completely it becomes a gift to the whole. At the highest level of development, individuals with superior perception hold their abilities lightly, seeing clearly without attachment, accepting what they observe, perceiving deeply without compulsion to fix everything. Jung called this the transcendent function, serving consciousness evolution naturally by embodying more conscious ways of being. Remember Jung's patient from 1913. After 3 years of individuation work, her life transformed completely. She learned to distinguish between her own psychological contents and absorbed material, found work where her perception helped others, built relationships with people who valued rather than feared her insights. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing superior perception as a curse and began understanding it as a gift requiring conscious development. She learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with perception. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This represents Jung's most dangerous discovery. Some individuals are born with consciousness exceeding collective readiness, and this perception will either destroy them through isolation or transform them into exactly what humanity needs. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup. It's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time, carrying gifts that consciousness evolution requires. The question isn't whether you should suppress perception to fit collective unconsciousness. The question is whether you'll develop individuation skills necessary to integrate perception consciously, transforming dangerous isolation into conscious service. Jung's method offers a path from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness, evolution with integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you become exactly what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be. Consciousness pioneers preparing humanity for inevitable but not yet obvious psychological development. The danger of seeing everything isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Once you learn to wield perception as consciously as Jung learned to wield his, the world needs your insights, but it needs them delivered through the lens of integrated wisdom. You hold the key to humanity's psychological evolution. The question is whether you'll have the courage to turn it. If this message touched your soul and you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the dangerous gift of seeing too clearly, comment below. I choose conscious integration. Your journey toward integrated wisdom begins with this choice, and your courage to walk this path serves not just your own healing, but the evolution of consciousness itself.